Okay, so I had to stop the video there because I kind of forgot what my second question is. Sorry about that, it happens to everybody. So the first question was, where does the force of morality come from? And the second question was, why do we feel this way? Well, I sort of forgot the second question because the two are interrelated really, and maybe they're not two questions, maybe they're the same one. Maybe the question, where does the force of morality come from, is related to why we feel this way. So if you think that the force of morality comes because of the sentiments we naturally have to be compassionate and empathetic and caring towards others, then that would explain where the sources of morality come from. Okay, I'm sorry I forgot that what these two questions were. This happens to me a lot, and this is part of what philosophy is. I'm thinking about these issues as I'm talking to you about them, and part of teaching is related to how I think about philosophy as well. When I teach, I figure these ideas for myself. It's not two different things. It's an interrelated enterprise. And I really miss not having the students there, because normally we interact a lot. Okay, what else can we say about morality? Morality differs from other things, like the law or social conventions and etiquette. So here is where I want you to stop the video and have a little think for yourselves. I want you to think of an example of a law that has nothing to do with morality. It could be an existing law in the country you live in, or it could be historical law, or anything you like, an example from another country. But it has to be a law, something that is required by the legal system, wherever you live, that doesn't have any moral implications, that doesn't have the sense of should or ought, independently of the fact that the law requires it. And then I want you to do the opposite. I want you to think of a moral command or a moral prohibition, something that you ought not to do, that has nothing to do with the law of a country, your country or any other country. I don't care, whichever example you can come up with. Ideally, if you have time, go and ask loads of different people to come up with examples, because in a seminar situation you would benefit from everybody else's ideas as well and hearing what they have to say. Okay, hopefully you've paused, hopefully you've come back with loads of ideas. So here is mine. Here is my example of a law that has nothing to do with morality. In some countries in the world, people drive their cars on the right-hand side of the road, and in some countries they drive their cars on the left-hand side of the road. If I was the ruler of my own mini kingdom, and it was an island as well, so it wasn't affected by anybody else directly, and I was setting it up for the first time, and I was wondering, where should cars in my mini kingdom drive? To the right or to the left? There is really no moral content to that question. It doesn't really matter morally whether I decide that people should drive to the right or drive to the left. And yet there are laws on this matter, because if we didn't have a law explaining and expecting everybody to drive on one and the same side of the road, there would be complete chaos and nobody could get anywhere. So there are practical reasons for having cars on the right or the left hand side of the road, but there are no moral reasons for choosing one or the other side of the road. Now, this is not true of all laws. Laws are conventions and agreements between people who share the same community, society, or state. Some laws are about practical things, like which side of the road do we drive on. But some laws involve morality and make moral presumptions. I'd imagine that almost all laws have a prohibition against murdering the innocent for no good reason whatsoever. And this is a moral prohibition. It might have some practical implications. If we all went around murdering each other, there would be complete chaos. But fundamentally, there is a moral objection to the idea that you can go around extinguishing the lives of innocent people for no good reason and you can get away with it. You shouldn't get away with it, but for moral reasons, because you are morally blameworthy. So, some laws have nothing to do with morality. Some laws presuppose certain moral assumptions, and some moral imperatives or prohibitions have nothing to do with the law. Now, the example you came up with will depend on which legal system you're thinking about, but here's mine: adultery. In many legal systems, adultery has nothing to do with the law. Does that mean that adultery is a nice thing to do? Of course not. If you decide to commit yourself to another person in a sexually monogamous way, in a way that reflects some conceptions of loyalty and trustworthiness, to break that promise and lie about it is a morally reprehensible thing to do. It is definitely the case that you have not behaved well here and that you are blameworthy. You might need to apologise, make reparations, change the way you live. I don't know. There's a number of different implications to what should happen now that you've done this kind of thing. But it is clear that this thing is morally wrong because of the betrayal of trust, the dishonesty, the disloyalty towards the person that you were in a couple with. Does that mean that this should necessarily be a matter of law? Many legal systems say no. While it is a moral matter, it is a private moral matter. Deal with it between yourselves. It is a matter between you and the partner you betrayed with your actions. It has nothing to do with the state. Now, this is a very interesting idea, and there's a huge area of discussion in legal philosophy over what counts as the public sphere, the sort of things that the state should intervene in and should legislate about, what counts as the private sphere, the things that have to do with the individual herself and not affected in such a way that the state ought to intervene and punish, prohibit, or encourage certain actions. Now, of course, I'm sure you've noticed that this is a very contentious example, the example of adultery. There are plenty of legal systems that have penalties for adultery as part of them. So, while the distinction between morality and the law is clear, the law has to do with our agreements as a collective of people who have come to live together, and morality has to do with this peculiar force of obligation whose source is not quite clear and is up for debate, but whose force is felt by everybody. It is not clear how the two come together and how they should interact. How many aspects of morality should also be part of what the law concerns itself with is a really massive question. Okay, we'll leave that to one side. Now you have a small glimpse of how morality is different from the law. Morality is also different from matters of convention or matters of etiquette. Have a little pause here and think about a matter of etiquette in your culture that has absolutely no moral implications or whatsoever. Okay, I'm in France at the moment, so I'll come up with a French example. In France, when you see someone for the first time that day, someone you know, but maybe not even know that well, someone that could even be described as an acquaintance in many other cultures, you have to give them 2 kisses. It's called la bise, and it's how you say good morning. There are very strict and well-defined rules regarding la bise. You do it the first time you see somebody that day, but never the second. If you make a mistake and you see someone later on in the day and you go to kiss them again, they will tell you quite sharply, no, we've seen each other already today, this is not going to happen again. So what is a very friendly sort of thing, la bise, the kissing, only happens once. This can be quite confusing for foreigners who may feel quite told off when they make the la bise mistake. It also extends to a large group of people. I tend to kiss everybody at the school gates. Every mum and dad and grandparents as well waiting there with the kids gets a kiss, and most of the kids get a kiss as well. In fact, the encouragement and almost force with which French young children are told to kiss strangers is something that would freak out other cultures, for example, the British, who would not be at all happy about their kids being encouraged to kiss absolutely everybody at the school gates. Apparently the same sort of thing happens in French offices. As you arrive in the morning, you kiss all your colleagues one by one, but you have to be careful exactly how you kiss them. I've made the mistake of touching people on the shoulder when I kiss them, because that's part of the Greek greeting. In Greece, you can kiss people, but many people that you know quite well, good friends, and you place your hand on their shoulder. If you were to touch French people, they stiffen up immediately. That is not how the la bise is done. So what do we have here? We have a social convention, a way of behaving with other people that's governed by very particular rules that are shared between a collection of people. That sounds like morality, doesn't it? That sounds like how moral issues are as well. There are rules about what you can and cannot do, what you ought and ought not to do, and towards whom you ought to do it, and how you ought to do it. The two seem very similar. But what is the difference? You tell me. Take a second to reflect. What is the difference between matters of etiquette and matters of morality? Or are they exactly the same thing? Hopefully you've come back with the idea that matters of etiquette are simply a matter of social convention and agreement, and there is nothing else of importance underlying them. Whereas matters of morality are not simply a matter of social agreement. They have a more fundamental basis from which the force of the command, of the imperative, of the ought comes from. Imagine we all got together and the majority of us who were not Greek decided that we don't like Greeks in our society. And we therefore agreed amongst ourselves that Greeks could not hold property, they couldn't be educated, they couldn't own money and other goods, and even that they could be imprisoned without due cause or due process. And because most of us are not Greek in this society, we agreed amongst ourselves that this is how things were going to be. Would that be morally acceptable? I think the answer would be no, because there is something fundamentally unjust about this kind of convention, this kind of agreement. And you can see that this applies to laws as well. Very often, some societies historically have passed laws that were perfectly legitimate laws that were passed in accordance with the legal requirements of that state, but that nevertheless allowed the state to do immoral things. So a law can be legal, but at the same time immoral. This is another huge area of debate. But generally, matters of etiquette and convention don't have the moral force behind them. There is no moral reason why in France you kiss twice without touching anybody and you kiss pretty much everyone, whereas in Greece you only kiss your good friends and you often put your hand on their shoulder, and in Britain if you went to kiss anybody they'd probably take a step back away from you. These are simply unimportant social conventions that have developed in that kind of way for interesting sociological and anthropological reasons, but they don't have the force of morality. Okay, let's try and wrap this up with a final idea. Your final exercise for today, your homework is, I'm going to give you a story and I want you to see how many moral elements there are in this story. Because it turns out it can sometimes be a little bit challenging for people to perceive morality, to understand that they are in a morally challenging or perplexing situation, a kind of situation that requires them to stop and think about their behaviour. This is not the case in the example of the burning building and the children who are dying. It's really obvious that you have a moral dilemma here. But perplexingly enough, it's not obvious to everyone all the time. For a while I used to teach medical students who didn't have a background in philosophy, and I used to teach them medical ethics as part of their medical degree. It was a really, really good program because philosophy was taught fully integrated within everything else. So it wasn't a case of me coming in to just give a lecture once a year on a theoretical topic that didn't impact on anything else that the students were learning. But ethics was part of every aspect of the curriculum and on everything the students did. So at one point, the third years, who had already had a couple of years of philosophical training and had reflected on ethics and knew what morality was, were on a ward round with a teacher. And the idea of the ward round is this: the group of students walks around the ward and observes what's happening. There may be patients who are having history taken, or complaining about their symptoms, their new symptoms, or there may be treatments taking place. You never know what's going to be happening during a ward round. The students are standing back and just observing the whole thing. Then when they leave the room, they go to their seminar room with a ward teacher and they discuss what has cropped up. And there could be all sorts of issues about how to make a diagnosis, how to take a good history, cultural sensitivity issues about how the patient felt, communication issues, and of course, moral issues. The ward teacher never knows what's going to happen during a ward round. They have to be ready for anything. So this particular ward round, the ward teacher told me the story afterwards, something really significant happened. And the teacher prompted the students and said, well, was there an ethical issue in this ward round? And none of the students could think of anything. And what they had missed was this: a 15-year-old patient refused treatment, and she was physically held down by 3 nurses while a 4th nurse injected her with a medicine. Now, it doesn't really matter whether this was the right or the wrong thing to do. What is important is that the medical students didn't even notice that this was an ethical issue. They had already been studying ethics for 2 years, and they hadn't been sensitized to seeing the ethically problematic out there in the world. Okay, so I'm going to give you the story, and I want you to go away and think how many ethical issues there are in this story. With a bit of luck, I'll remember my own story and I'll tell you how many ethical issues I can identify at the next video. Okay, so the story is this. This morning, I put my 2 young children in front of the tablet and begged them to watch a video so that I could have time to come downstairs and create this video for the internet as part of my work and as part of also what I think might be fun for other people to do. So I came here downstairs and I asked them to please not bother me at all while I could do my video, which I'm then going to put freely available on YouTube for people to see. And I'm pleased to tell you that 2 people viewed yesterday's video. Thank you very much, particularly to viewer number 1, because viewer number 2 is someone from my family who doesn't probably really count, but I now have 2 viewers and it can only go better from here. Well, maybe I'm being overtly optimistic. Can you have minus viewers on YouTube? I'm not too sure. When I got my royalties for my books this year from the publisher, and the royalties were so low that the publisher doesn't even transfer the money into my account because it's not worth the bank transfer fee. This particular year it was even worse because 2 people had bought my book and then returned it. So it was even minus royalties, worse than every other year. Okay, my story was a bit rambling, but it doesn't matter. It covers loads of different things. So let's see what you come up with, and we'll talk about it at the next video. The next video, we're going to talk about why be moral. Why bother in the first place? Why shouldn't I just do whatever is best for me rather than anybody else? I'll leave you with that. Bye-bye.